Hello, everyone. My name is Sheldon Gooch, and I am the founder of I'm Free Incorporated, which is a ministry, a nonprofit organization that's a 501c3 that we minister to the needs of ex-offenders. But it's not just for ex-offenders, it's for anyone who really have not found their way in life and they're looking for some direction. It is a full and comprehensive curriculum, the I'm Free Curriculum. It can take someone who has no idea what they want to do, just no clue, and take them from that point, and within 3 to 6 months have a clear, defined purpose and a clearly defined direction with goals that they can visualize and see, and with the energy and the fuel to make it happen. I'm going to share just a few bits, some highlights. It's a pretty exhaustive program and has a lot of detail in it. It is a process learning experience. And so for those who actually engage and get involved in this process, they literally come, many times they come with their notions of what it should be and what, success means to them and why they exist. And then there are many who have no idea what true success is or why they are here or why they exist. So we take them from literally nothing but an open mind, and we help them chart their course. And at the end of it, they have a clearly specific, I sometimes say severely specific life plan that will take on a life of its own. It becomes a living organism, and success is imminent and inevitable. Speaking of success, now I'm going to share a couple of things with you. These are highlights of I'm Free Curriculum. Someone said I didn't need to put this online and put this out there, but actually the full modules are on my website, which is imfreeinc.com. It's already been published and it's already been copyrighted, so I don't mind sharing it openly. I want the information out, and I want people to get set free. And so I'm going to talk about success in a minute, but before I do that, I got to explain what qualifies me to do this. Number one, I was a school dropout at 14, and I was strung out on heroin at 15. I was an armed robber. I was a drug dealer. Been in a lot of gunfights. I've seen a lot of people lose their lives. I was a pretty rough kid. As a matter of fact, by the time I was 16 years old, there was a restraining order in the whole community where I could not even go in those boundaries. It was about a 5-mile radius and where all my family lived. But I was such a hellraiser that I couldn't cross those boundaries. And so I became a product of my environment. I was born and raised in Detroit and came up in a single-parent home and all of that. Came up in the church, though, but I took to the streets at 14 and dropped out of school and all of that. And I did everything I thought I was big enough and bad enough to do. And of course, I paid a lot of consequences for that. We'll get into that a little bit later, but suffice to say that I ended up in prison more than once. But the last time I ended up with a sentence of life plus 30 years plus 30 more years. Now, when I stood before that judge and he said, "Young man, you're going to do life and then you're going to do 60 years. For me, my existence as I knew it was over. I just felt like, man, it's over for me. And I went to Parchman Prison in Mississippi thinking that, I'm never getting out. You got life, and then you got to do 30 years, and then you got to do 30 more years. As far as I was concerned, the key had been thrown away in my regard. And so I went there with a bad attitude, blaming everybody else for my problem, and just really focusing on gaining my respect. I said, if I got to be here for the rest of my life, then I'm going in from day one. I'm going to hurt somebody, and I'm going to establish a name for myself. Now, there's a lot of old convicts around who knew the old Sheldon Gooch, and I did a lot of fighting, and I never lost. But I was unhappy. And because I had a previous experience in prison, plus I had been locked up in jail and the training school so many times, I felt like, man, this is not working for me. Who I am is not working for me. So the first most important decision I made in my life was to give my life to Christ while I was there, with the influence of a lady, a powerful lady named Miss Wendy Hatcher, who was the chaplain there, who saw in me what I couldn't see in myself. And she would say, you're a winner and you're a champion and you've got what it takes, and you're an inspiration to so many, and you're a leader, and God's got a plan and a purpose for your life. And I used to say, lady, you don't even know me, but she never stopped. She just kept dripping. And it was in one of the activities that she scheduled at a lay witness conference there in the prison where I gave my life to Christ. And I tell you what, it was the most important decision that I ever made, because at that point, I began to look at myself and what I was doing and what I was about, and I said, you know what, there's got to be something better. And God began to inspire me with direction. And to make a long story short, I began to read everything I could find. And the more I read, the broader my perspective on life became. And I was in the Word every day, and I was just learning, and I began to realize that I didn't have to be who I was. Which I knew it wasn't working. And so I said, my best thinking has got me into a situation that my best thinking can't get me out of. I've got to be different. And so I set upon this journey called CANEI. And with I Am Free Incorporated, we use CANEI. It's a curriculum. CANEI stands for Continuous and Never-Ending Improvement. And I made a commitment that from the day that I decided to make this commitment until the end of my existence, I was going to learn something new, meet someone new, gain a new concept, learn a new principle. But we had this voracious appetite to learn. And I began to write down goals, my long-term and short-term goals. And, when you got life plus 60 years, goals is really not, the customary thing to do. But I looked at so many guys who had so much less time, who were just sitting around wasting the time. And I said, man, you know what? I'm going to use this time, however long it is, to get better and better and better. And so I set about on a course of personal development and professional development. And as I said, I read all of these books, textbooks, and all types of things. Nothing fiction. Everything was educational. And I began to share with other inmates around me. And we saw results. And so when we fast forward, I was allowed through our speaking team and ministry that we developed while they're in prison, called Inside Ministries. And we would go to, as trustees, go all over the state of Mississippi with an armed escort, speaking in schools and sometimes jails and churches. And God began to show me who I was in that process. And that's the reason why one of the concepts of the CANEI Curriculum, CANEI Curriculum, is the me I see is the me I'll be. That's one of the key concepts. What you can see, and if you can see yourself in a $200,000 home driving a really nice car, you can be yourself in that. But trust me, if you can't see yourself there, you can't be yourself there. If you can't see yourself successful, you cannot be yourself successful. So, I had to first, in order to see myself there, I had to define success. And when I would lead groups on the inside, and I've led many groups, hundreds of groups on the outside, of professionals, of schools and churches and community groups and so forth, I asked, what is the meaning of success? And many of them have their various different ideas. But I subscribe to the philosophy of the late great Jim Rohn, who said that there are 5 key components to success. And when I have applied these 5 key components, I have felt successful. And one of which is, the first one is to have a vertical alignment. In other words, have a connection with God, with the divine creator, the one who made me. If I don't have a connection with him, then I'm flying by the seat of my pants. So that's the number one thing. Then the number 2 thing is to have a healthy relationship on the horizontal plane with people. To have a good relationship with mankind. And then the third thing is to have reasonably good health. Okay, I say reasonably because, you just do the best you can to be healthy. And that's what I've done. And I've exercised most of my life, so that wasn't really a hard thing for me. I was a vegan for 13 and a half years, and, I'm fairly healthy at my age. The fourth thing is a measure of financial independence. Because, see, it's important that we have our resources that we need to make it. And so notice that resources and financial independence was not top on the list. It's literally in this order. This is the hierarchy. And the last thing is the perpetual pursuit of a worthy ideal. In other words, always be pursuing something to the point where when you get to the point where you have stopped pursuing, stopped going after, stop striving, then you really have given up at that point. And a friend of mine, Les Brown, many of you know him, motivational speaker, he told me once, he said, many people die in their early 20s. They've given up. But we don't get around to burying them until they're 60, 65, 70. And so they end up dying a life that they never lived. And that's to me, that's a travesty. So those 5 things are the underwriting current, the undercurrent of everything that I share and everything that I teach. And so, those are just, orientation type concepts, and it's important that we guide the mental process through a journey where it can take on these things. A lot of times we tell people, you need to stop doing this, and you need to do this, and you need to do that. But they don't understand why. They don't know how to step from here to where we think they ought to be. And so this guides them through that process. I believe that there are 4 stages of learning. And this is science that I'm about to share. And the first stage of learning is unconscious incompetence. Unconscious incompetence. It's like I'm not aware of the fact that I don't know something. We don't know what we don't know. That's the first stage. And I'll give you an example of the 4 stages in just a second. But, unconscious incompetence says you don't know what you don't know. Period. And then the second stage is conscious incompetence. What does that mean? It means, I've just made a discovery. There's some things that I don't know. And when you make that discovery, 2 things happen. You go, that's great. Yeah, I made that discovery. Or you can say, you know what? I need to learn this. Okay? And it was always my confession and always my declaration that I need to learn this. In fact, education means so much to me that if I could get paid to go to school, I'd be there right now. The third stage of learning is a conscious competence. In other words, now you know that there's something there, and now you're figuring it out, and you are able to perform and to function in it as long as you're conscious of what you're doing. And then the last stage is unconscious competence. And what does that mean? Okay, it just means that now it's second nature. You don't have to think about it. Your first response or your first inclination or your first impulse is to do it a certain way because you have muscle memory or mental memory, the way you thought about it, thought process memory. And so I like to use an example of someone driving a standard automobile. The first time they they get into a standard shift automobile, they begin to realize, whoa, what is this? And why do I have two pedals? Whoa, so now that really is the second stage, because now they realize that there's something that they don't know. But if they never got into the driver's seat, then they had unconscious incompetence. They didn't know that they didn't know. They may have seen the vehicle going by and said, maybe one day I'll drive a vehicle like that. But if they don't know that it's a standard shift and they don't know anything about a standard shift, they're going to be in trouble. So what they do, you sit in that vehicle and you realize, oh, wow, okay, I've got to learn this. That's the conscious incompetence. The third level of conscious competence is when you begin to learn that timing is important. That I can go into first gear and I've got to synchronize my movements by pressing the clutch, changing the gear, releasing the clutch, and hitting the gas. And and you have to think about it. So you get to the point where you're good, and the car's not jumping or sliding backwards down a hill. And you realize now, I got to think about this, and I've got to focus on this to get it done. And then you get it done, and you get better, and you get better, and you get better. Now you get conscious or unconscious competence, where it becomes second nature. You don't think about it. I've seen ladies at the stoplights putting on makeup and drinking coffee and talking on the telephone and still shifting gears at the same time. That's called unconscious competence. And so when we start looking at those four stages of learning, and you get somebody fresh out of prison or someone who has no direction or has no clue on what it is that they have to do in their lives, then they have to go through those stages. And it takes some drilling, it takes some rehearsing, it takes some practice for them to get to the point where they are programmed for success. And that's one of the goals of the CANEI Curriculum and I'm Free Incorporated. And we have many different discussions, and I can talk to you about some of the objectives and so forth, but I won't do that on this particular piece. But I will say that we will be doing some online courses, and we will be breaking it down step for step, word for word, and we'll be giving 100% of what it takes to be successful. Just before I close out, I want to talk to you about some of the discussion topics that we will be dealing with, particularly with men. Okay, particularly with men. But before I do that, I got to say this. I wrote down my long-term and short-term goals while I was in prison. Over the years, I rewrote them and rewrote them and rewrote them. I spent a lot of time in prison. And the more I rewrote those goals and my plan out and all of that, the more specific it became. There's a concept called the law of attraction. And so what happened is this thing that I wrote out, this plan, it literally took a life of its own. And I remember thinking, this is going to happen with me or without me. But I saw myself standing before thousands of people sharing what great things God had done in my life. And when I mentioned it, to some of my colleagues, my inmate partners, my homeboys, and they said, man, you're crazy, man. You got life plus 60, okay? It's absurd for you to be doing what you're doing. And I said, you know what? It'd be better for me to be prepared for an opportunity and not get one than to have an opportunity and not be prepared. But at the top of my list was education. And when I did get a miracle release where God, glory, moved on the heart of the governor and I was granted a release, all that time that I had waiting on me was cut off. And I walked free from the prison. But let me tell you, I was saying I'm free long before the physical manifestation came from it. I got set free from the slavery and bondage of sin, even though I was still bound by the structural boundaries of a prison facility. And God gave me a song called I Am Free 2 days after I got saved. And that has been my mantra. It has been my force, my fuel. I'm free. And God did it in a way that only He could get the glory. So I look back after I was released, I guess it was about 4, maybe 5 years after I had been released. I was going through some paperwork and I found that yellow legal pad. And I remember the last time I really looked at that yellow legal pad that had all those details and all that life plan in it. I was standing before a body of people who were going to determine whether or not to let me go. And they said, "We are considering letting you go." And boy, I felt like I had to use the bathroom. And so they said, "What would you do if we were to let you go?" And I said, "Well, I'm glad you asked." And I gave them that yellow legal pad. And they started flipping through the pages and looking at it. And they were looking at each other and they got quiet. And then they asked me to step out. And I'm thinking, oh, Lord. Okay. So they were reviewing my plan. When they called me back in about 40 minutes later, they said, "You wrote this?" I said, "Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am, I did." And they said, "You really thought about this?" And I said, "Well, pardon the expression, I've had nothing but time." And they said, "Are you going to do this?" I said, "With all due respect, it's already done. I'm just waiting for that paperwork to catch up." Well, they thought that was profound and they had a little conversation about that. But then they said, "You know what? We're going to let you go." And that's exactly what they did. As I said, 5 years later, I was looking at that yellow legal pad and everything that I said I was going to do, no, everything that I wrote that I was going to do had been accomplished. And I used all those goals that had been accomplished as a platform from which I could catapult myself to a whole nother area that was not written down on that particular pad. You see, I believe to think is to put it in ink, and that's the reason why the scripture tells us to write the vision and to make it plain. Making it plain means it needs to be clear. And it says, write it on tablets, which is a yellow legal pad as far as I'm concerned, so that he who sees it may run with it. And who's going to see it? You're going to see it. I saw it. What do you mean run? It gave me the energy to go after it. There's something magical, something supernatural about being obedient and writing it down. I ask people, what are your goals? How do you see yourself over the next 3 to 5 years? Oh, I got goals. I'm going to do this. And okay, can I see it? Is it written? It's not written? Oh, okay. See, that can be very fleeting. And so it's important that you anchor it and that you write it down. And so in my courses, I have my clients and the folks that I'm coaching write it down in severe detail, because the more details and the more clarity it has, the more likely it will happen, and the quicker it will occur. You see, I believe what you're looking for is looking for you, but it slows itself down when you're not clear. It slows itself down when you're not clear. It's almost like success is looking for the looker. Is it you? Is it you? Is it you? And when it gets to you and you don't know what success says you're not ready. Okay? So we have to be clear. Now, let me close with some of the discussion topics. And you can go to my website again and look at the modules. I don't mind you copying them down, but if you really want to get the nuts of it and the nuts and bolts of it, you need to tune in right here as we start to do the online classes. And also we'll be doing some public forums and some public classes that you can participate in. Bring your pen, your recorders, take copious notes, because this information is transformational and it will literally do the work. It will literally do what it's designed to do and cause success in you. But I want to talk real quick about some of the male discussion topics that I do. And I think it's very important. I have a friend, a dear friend, who is the founder of a ministry called the Geneva Foundation. And while I'm doing I'm Free Incorporated, I'm also on her board. Her name is Colleen Sanders, and Geneva Foundation ministers to females and helps them walk their way out of the darkness into the light and become functional after they have endured one of the many forms of abuse. And so one of the things she and I were talking one day, and she was talking about all the many times that people get charged with domestic violence or sexual exploitation and all these things, and how few of them actually get processed through the judicial system. And so, but so many people are focusing on the victim, and that is such a need. But when we get the victim healed, then the knucklehead that did the abuse is still running around looking for the next victim because he's not cured. And so I decided to, as a compliment to what the great work she's doing, is to see if I can have a face-to-face with the perpetrator. And I understand the perpetrators. I've watched them for years and years. They end up in prison too. And so as a way of acting out, or as a way of dealing with their own hurt, they act out and they hurt other people. And so we deal with that. But one of the topics is leaving a legacy. You know, the Bible says that a good man leaves an inheritance for his children's children. And that's the word. And so most of us look at that as property, land, money, and inheritance. And so the Bible says a good man leaves an inheritance for his children's children. But the truth of it is, a good man, in his inheritance, a bad man can leave money. But a good man's inheritance is moral character, integrity. That's what a good man's inheritance is, or is a part of that. Okay? But here's what I found out. A bad man leaves a legacy as well. A bad man leaves an inheritance as well. We call it a generational curse. Some of the negative things that we experience from our fathers, guys, we end up perpetuating that from one generation to the next until somebody says the buck stops here. See, we have a phrase in the prison, and it's probably out here in the streets as well, that says, I ain't going out like that. Okay? The bottom line is we all need some form of a legacy. Okay? Some more profound than others, but the bottom line is we have a choice to have in our future generations what we are willing to start and bring to it. You see, it only took one Kennedy, one Trump, one Gates, one person to change the course of a family tree forever. I challenge the men in my sessions to you be the one. You be the one. It only takes one to change the course of a family tree forever. There are people right now being born with silver spoons in their mouths, but somebody made a decision during the Great Depression, when people were standing in soup lines and eating government cheese, that they were going to have in their future what they were willing to bring to it. And if it's going to be, it's up to me. So folks, that's one of the topics. We have a host of them. We explore them. It's a discussion thing. We exchange back and forth. And many times we find out that people who are a certain way are willing to confess that I don't like the way that I am. And ladies and gentlemen, that is the first step. So if this has been useful to you, you can like it, you can share it, but more importantly, go to imfree.com, imfreeinc.com, like the site, stay tuned for when the classes will be scheduled. We're still doing some preparatory things, getting the foundation laid, but we're ready to go. I've been doing this for 30 years, and I have a 100% success rate with those people with whom I've worked. I had one guy that I thought fell through the cracks, but about 7 or 8 months ago, I found out that he was now pastoring in Greenwood, and so Greenwood, Mississippi. So definitely, I hope this was useful to you. But there's a lot of work that we've got to do. I've got a curriculum that's that thick. I'll be using the CANEI Curriculum, but I'll also be using my brother's curriculum. Now, here's a gentleman that got saved in prison. He had life without parole. He did 43 calendar years. God gave me the privilege of doing a concert in that prison where he gave his life to Christ and began to evangelize the prison. And there are hundreds of people who have given their lives to Christ during his ministry while he was there. He died less than a year ago in prison, but he wrote a book, as did I. My book is called I'm Free. It's the autobiography of Sheldon Gooch, and it just tells of a guy who had a riotous life, that had a rapid downward spiral, and was almost gone. And you can get that on Amazon. Now he has a book called "The Mentoring the New Integrity." My book was a testimony of a guy whose life was thrown away. His book is about a way that you can mitigate a person's life who's on such a course. And unfortunately, like I said, he died in prison less than a year ago, just shattering my hopes of being able to partner with him out here and have a major impact on society and on the community. But I'll be doing some of his work in honor of him. It is amazing, well thought out, very comprehensive, and he developed it over many, many years, a couple of decades. So hope you'll tune in. Hope you enjoyed what you saw. We just give God all the glory and all the praise for every good thing that will take place with I Am Free Inc. and with those who participate. Have a fantastic day.